Owen gun, submachine gun, was an Australian invention. Some of the development work was done here, but it was never produced here. It was made at the Lithgow factory in Wollongong. A number of them came back through the factory here for refurbishment and upgrading after the war. They had a sliding safety catch put on, for example, but the original production wasn't here. At the start of the Second World War, Australian forces were using a mixture of submachine guns. Some were English, the Sten particularly, and the American .45 Thompson Tommy gun. At that same time, a young lieutenant in the army called Evelyn Owen, who was a gun nut and had a backyard workshop, made a prototype of what became the Owen submachine gun. He only had it in .22. He offered it to the army as a prototype and they said, take it away, it's not British. He went back to the army and left the prototype in a sugar bag in his garage, and the house was then rented to the general manager of Lysart's, who found the gun, said, interesting, took it to work, they played with it, they argued with the army about what sort of calibre it ought to be. They finally settled on a format and a 9mm parabellum calibre. The army still didn't want it. They were hell-bent on adopting the Sten. But then they announced that they were going to hold formal trials to adopt an Australian submachine gun. And Lysart had enough clout that they said and got away with, include the Owen, what have you got to lose? And the trials were fairly onerous. You dip it in water, you pull it out, shake it, fire it. Dip it in mud, pull it out, shake it, fire it. Dip it in sand, pull it out, shake it, fire it. You show a Tommy gun a photo of a patch of sand and it seizes. The Owen was the only one that survived the trials. I didn't like it, but the army accepted it. It was exceedingly popular with everyone that used it. It was designed for jungle warfare. It was a pistol bullet, short range, spray bullets around, but in the jungle, if you could see your enemy 5 metres away, you were doing well. Lysart finished up making about 55,000 of them. Could have sold as many again to the Americans. The Americans loved it. They were deliberately losing Tommy guns so they could get their hands on an Owen. They were still in use in Vietnam through the Korean War, still in use early in Vietnam. A few models prototypes were made to try and improve it, never could. It was just a good, simple design that worked. It had a vertical magazine on top. It didn't get caught in the bushes when you were pushing your way through the jungle. Gravity helped the bullet in, gravity helped the case out. It had a spring compartment that was separate from the bolt compartment so that mud didn't necessarily jam them both. Very, very loose tolerances. The only accurate tolerance in the whole thing was the barrel, so it could be made pretty well anywhere. And you couldn't kill it with a stick. It worked. With the Owen gun, the vertical magazine was a definite advantage because you didn't have a fairly long magazine sticking out the side to snag on the passing scenery. There are machine guns about, and there's Italian ones and Japanese ones with a magazine out the side. Just generally, vertical magazines feed better. Gravity doesn't pull the bullet sideways, pulls them straight down into the line of the pistol.
Yep.
People can't help tinkering with firearms, and the factory's no exception.
Nothing's changed since either, Brian.
The Lithgow factory was set up to make the SMLE rifle #1 Mark III and 3-star. The English lost a lot of their gear at Dunkirk and had to rearm quickly, and there was on the shelf a redesigned 303 called the #4. Had been a sealed pattern for a number of years, but nobody was having a war, so they never proceeded to production. After Dunkirk, they dragged the plans off the shelf, and England rearmed and produced a lot of #4s. They took the plans to America and approached the Savage Rifle Company and the Long Branch Company in Canada, and the Americans and Canadians finished up making about 2 million #4s. Various branches of the military had differing demands for guns, and especially with the jungle type warfare in the Pacific, both the English and Australian militaries asked for a shorter, lighter firearm, basically a jungle carbine. The English were rearming with the number 4, so their jungle carbine is a cut down number 4. The Australians were still producing the number 1 Mark III, so our carbine was a cut down number 3. Externally fairly similar, same flash hider, different butt and different receiver, that's the main difference. The Australians asked for a shortened and lightened standard 303, and a number of experimental models were made, never got beyond a few hundred. The war finished before they were ever issued. They had their own problems with a shorter barrel. They were a couple of pounds lighter, so the recoil was fairly fierce, and the muzzle flash was something awesome. They just never resolved their problems before the war finished. The English had the number 4, their sniper rifle was a modified number 4. The Australians were using the number 1 Mark III, so our sniper rifle was a heavy barrelled number 1 Mark III. There were different variants. The military wanted a firearm basically that didn't have wood on it. They wanted something that would not absorb water, absorb gas. A number of materials were trialled. One of them was Bakelite, not a roaring success. It got a bit brittle when it was hot. One of the bad things about a grenade is that you can't throw it far enough to be outside the shrapnel zone, and an attachment was made to a 303. It's basically a cup that clips onto the muzzle. A Mills grenade will slide in. You slide it in far enough that the cup supports the fly-off handle. You pull the pin, slide it in the rest of the way. Put a heavy-duty blank in the rifle, sit the butt on the ground, point it in the general direction and pull the trigger on it. It will throw a grenade further than you can. They used rifles that were getting towards the end of their service life. They had worn barrels or worn parts. If it wasn't serviceable when you started, it generally was when you finished. They bound the woodwork in copper wire so that if it blew up you didn't get quite so many splinters. They're not good rifles. When the factory started, the buildings, the machines were American, but the contract for materials went to England. All the different grades of steel that went into a 303 were imported from England. The wood was imported from England, and it was generally walnut. It was an English contract, it was called English walnut. Some of it came from Italy, but that's by the by. And that was the case basically until the end of the First World War. When peace was declared, they could relax a little bit and they started to investigate local supply. And this board is the 9 local timbers that were tested. They had to be obviously available, renewable, machinable and stable once they were machined. They finally settled on Coachwood and Queensland maple, and most of the 303s after that were made in those 2 materials. All 9 of those were made in 1919. None of them have a serial number, they just got the assembly batches. As far as I know, they've never been fired. They're display samples. Made a lot, 642,000 303s. They were issued exclusively to Australian forces. At the end of the war, tens of thousands of them were returned to the factory. Some of them were refurbished and given to the army for use and storage. They still had a lot left over. They sporterised them and sold them to the general public. The most common was a 22 Hornet. They also made a couple of trial samples of a 310, which was a bit strange because it was an obsolete round even then. They found that you could put a heavy barrel in a 303 and bore it to take a 410 shotgun cartridge, and they made them. It started a trend. Every gunsmith in Australia started pulling 303s apart and putting sporting barrels in them, and they still do. The government asked the factory to make a cheap single-shot 22 for farmers, and there's a range of them there. They started off with the Model 1, which was single-shot. Within a year they modified it and put a magazine on it and became the Model 12. A shorter, lighter version called the Model 55 was mechanically identical to the Model 12. It was intended to serve the market until the American production caught up with peacetime production. In fact, they made about 215,000 of Model 1 and about 88,000 of the Model 12 and Model 55. And they, instead of being a 6-month project, they were still making them in 1957. In the Korean War, the English and Australians realised that the bolt-action rifle had had its day. The Belgians had been playing with semi-autos since during the Second World War. England, Australia, Canada set up a committee to investigate semi-autos. They were very taken with the Belgian FN. They got trials, models made, played with them for a few years and improved them. They developed a folding cocking lever instead of a knob that stuck out, different flash eliminator, different carry handle. It was adopted as in Australia was the L1A1, in Canada was the C1. They were retrofitted, they were converted from the Belgian and European metric dimensions to imperial dimensions. Strange decision. They're called inch FALs. The English, Canadian and Australian models were totally interchangeable. Canadian could break his breech block, put an Australian breech block in and go back to work. At the time, South Africa was subject to embargo because of apartheid. Noted the outcome of the committee deliberations and went directly to FN and leased the right to make them. Theirs was made as the R1, probably in metric, so they're not interchangeable. The Indians were outside the Commonwealth by then. They went the same route. Had a mixture of imperial and metric machines, and their rifles reflect that. So they assemble correctly, they work correctly, but the bits aren't interchangeable with the Commonwealth stuff. The L1A1 was introduced in 1958, went through Vietnam, was superseded with the change of NATO ammunition in the 80s. NATO changed its standard from 7.62 to 5.56. Australia went its own way on that occasion and finished up adopting this Austrian Steyr rifle, modified it slightly, it became the Osteyr, made under licence for years until the Lithgow factory became a licensed development arm of Steyr, and they now make their own changes. It's gone through several development iterations. The early models had a fixed carry handle / sight. The Army decided they wanted the adaptability to put a telescopic sight, night sight, whatever on it. So the next model came out with a rail on it. The current model has a fixed barrel, not a removable barrel. It has a rail for mounting a grenade launcher, so you don't need an armour to do it. It has a rail for a tactical torch. Torch needs a battery. They made the butt a little bit bulbous and stored the battery in there. It's evolution rather than revolution. The Army says they'll be using the 5.56 for the next 20 years. We'll see. Marksman of some note. He worked with the factory in developing the Slazenger single-shot rifle. Also worked with other companies, a Sport Coat company in Adelaide, for example, to develop his own range of weapons. A lot of them were semi-auto. He advertised by having basically a travelling circus. He was a trick shooter, and he could shoot a penny out of the air. We have a sample here. He could shoot a gramophone needle out of the air. He did a lot of his trick shooting with a little semi-auto Browning. He could shoot at something, and being a semi-auto, the gun would eject the cartridge into the air. He could then turn and shoot the cartridge before it hit the ground. His party trick was to get his assistant to hold an aspirin between the finger and thumb, and he would shoot it out.
How many assistants did he go through?
I don't think he lost too many. We have a couple of cartoons, the rabbit cartoons. He drew them from a range of 10 metres with a .22 rifle, fired a series of shots and drew lines to make a cartoon. A lot of his rifles didn't have a foresight. Absolute point and shoot marksman.
Wow. Are there any Vickers made here, or are they?
Yes.
There were.
The one in the hands-on over in the corner is made here. They made about 15,000 Vickers between 1928 and 1945.